My parents worshipped my brother and treated me like I didn't exist, so I ditched the family cruise. What happened next sent them spiraling out of control. I'm not sure when I first realized that my brother, Adam, and I were living in two completely different families. Maybe it was back in high school, when the divide in how we were treated became glaringly obvious. Adam got caught selling pills once, a no big deal, according to my parents. Just a rough patch, they said. Meanwhile, when I got caught smoking weed, it was as if I'd single-handedly burned down the neighborhood. My parents, Beth and Richard, threatened to kick me out so fast my head spun. That's when I realized Adam could set the world on fire, and they'd hand him a cozy blanket and call it a learning experience.
Me?
I could strike a single match, and they'd call in the fire department. As the years went by, the gap only grew wider. Adam, the golden child, managed to drop out of college not once, not twice, but 3 times. Each time, my parents shrugged it off, saying, "He's still finding himself," as though that was an acceptable life strategy. Meanwhile, I graduated from college, albeit a semester late, and they chastised me for not trying hard enough. My achievements never seemed to measure up. By the time I turned 22 in 2020, I had landed my first real job as a technical writer. I was proud of myself, so proud, but the moment was short-lived. My parents immediately cut me off their health insurance, as if my independence was something that deserved punishment. "You can handle yourself now," they said. Meanwhile, Adam stayed on their insurance until he turned 26, for extra years of being treated like a child while I was forced to navigate adulthood without a safety net. The imbalance between us became impossible to ignore. Adam stayed in Colorado, the same state where he'd dropped out of college, doing nothing with his life. He didn't work, didn't study, and yet my parents sent him money to cover his rent, bills, and necessities. And what did Adam do with their generosity? He bought a $22,000 dog. Yes, you heard that right. A purebred German Shepherd named Max, complete with training and a fancy pedigree. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my tiny apartment, budgeting for groceries, while my mom gushed over Max like he was the most precious thing in the world. The worst came when I was 24. Early in 2023, I got laid off during company downsizing and couldn't afford my rent. With no other option, I had to move back home to Oklahoma City. I already felt like a failure, but my parents made sure to drive that point home. After months of job hunting, I landed a new role in May 2023. I was excited, relieved, but that relief was short-lived. The day I proudly announced my new job, my parents blindsided me with the news. I owed them $10,000 in back rent. $10,000. We had never discussed rent when I moved in. They had said I could stay until I got back on my feet. I contributed to groceries, took on freelance work to help out, and thought I was doing enough. But now, suddenly, they had decided I owed them for every single month I'd lived under their roof. I knew arguing wouldn't help. Beth and Richard didn't handle confrontation well, and pushing back would only make my life more miserable.
So I paid.
I worked tirelessly, saved every penny I could, and managed to pay them off by September 2023, just before moving in with my boyfriend, Tom. That's the thing about my parents. They never asked Adam for anything. Not even when he drained their savings for his failed college attempts. But me? The moment I found financial stability, they couldn't wait to wring me dry. I can still hear my mom's voice in my head. "We're just motivating you to be independent, Sarah." Independent? I wanted to scream. I had been independent my whole life. What they really meant was, "We're exploiting you because we know you'll let us." Then came the final straw, the cruise. It was late September when my parents announced their grand plan, a week-long family vacation over Thanksgiving. My mom was practically glowing as she described all the fun we'd have. She talked about Adam and his girlfriend, Laura, and how wonderful it would be for them to join us. Then she turned to me and said, "Since you have a good job now, you can buy your own ticket." The words hit me like ice water. "Wait, you're paying for everyone else but not me?" I asked, incredulous. "Adam's still finding his way," she replied, her tone rehearsed. "And Laura's family isn't well off. You can afford it, Sarah." It's not like you'd need a fancy room anyway. Not a fancy room. That was their justification, as if I should feel grateful just to be allowed on the boat, crammed into some windowless cabin like an afterthought. I wanted to scream at the hypocrisy. If the rooms didn't matter, why was Adam getting a suite? Why wasn't he paying for his own ticket? He was nearly 30 years old and still finding his way. I argued, but it wasn't about the money. I could afford the ticket. It was about fairness. But fairness doesn't exist in my family, not when it comes to Adam. My mom shook her head and said, "Green isn't a good look on you, Sarah."
Green.
Jealousy. I hate that word more than anything. They always weaponize it to dismiss my feelings, as if my frustration is petty, as if I'm unreasonable for wanting to be treated equally. I walked out of their house that night, fuming. Tom, my boyfriend, and the one person who has always stood by me, told me to skip the trip.
You don't owe them this, he said.
For the first time, I agreed. So I made a decision. I wasn't going. In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, the silence was deafening. My parents assumed I'd cave, they always do. They think I'm too weak to stand up to them, too afraid to rock the boat. This time, I let them believe it. I didn't tell them I wasn't coming. I kept quiet while they finalized plans, booked hotel rooms, and excitedly talked about excursions. It wasn't until the night before the trip that they texted me. "Be here by 8 a.m. so we can drive to New Orleans. Don't be late," my dad texted. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. After a moment, I typed my reply. "Since you didn't think I was worth the effort to include, I'll be spending Thanksgiving with Tom's family instead. Have a great trip with your favorite child." With that, I muted the group chat. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of power. I was choosing myself over their impossible expectations. Tom's family had invited me to their cabin in Arkansas for Thanksgiving, and I decided to go. I didn't owe my parents anything. Not an apology, not my money, and certainly not my time. When I told Tom about the text, he smiled and kissed my forehead. "Good for you," he said. I wish I could say it felt good. It didn't, not yet anyway. There's something about standing up to your parents that leaves a pit in your stomach, even when you know you're right. But I was so tired of being their afterthought, of coming in second place. The morning of the cruise was unusually quiet in my apartment, a strange stillness settling over everything like the calm before a storm. I sipped my coffee, staring at my muted phone. I knew they'd start messaging soon, asking where I was, reminding me that the car was leaving in half an hour. I half expected my dad to call and ask if I needed gas money for the drive. At 8:15, my phone buzzed on the counter. I let it vibrate, the screen lighting up against the granite like a firefly in the dark. "Where are you?" "It's past 8. We're waiting." I could almost hear my mom's impatient sigh, see her glancing at the clock and shaking her head. By 8:30, my dad joined in with his usual no-nonsense tone. "Sarah, we're leaving for the port in 10 minutes. You need to hurry up." I spent years scrambling to meet their impossible expectations, ones they never held for Adam. I could picture my brother now, carefree and half asleep in the back seat of the car, probably not even aware or concerned that I wasn't coming. Tom walked into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "They text you yet?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Of course they did," I said, rolling my eyes. "They'll figure it out soon enough." He gave me a look, the kind that said, "I'm proud of you, but I know this is hard." And it was. As much as I wanted to feel triumphant, I couldn't. My chest felt heavy, like someone had pressed a brick against my heart. "Do you think I'm being petty?" I asked suddenly. Tom sat down across from me, his voice calm and steady. "Sarah, they made this choice. You're just showing them what it feels like to be left out." "But they're my parents," I said quietly. "I shouldn't just." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Your parents treat Adam like he walks on water and act like you're a burden. You've bent over backward for them your whole life. You're not being petty. You're setting a boundary." I nodded, though the ache in my stomach refused to go away. The group chat continued buzzing, their texts growing increasingly frantic. Finally, I picked up my phone, typed a single message, and hit send. "Since you didn't put in the effort to include me, I will be spending Thanksgiving with Tom's family instead. Have a great trip with your favorite child. Then, I muted the chat and placed my phone face down on the table. Tom smiled faintly. You're allowed to put yourself first, Sarah. I just hoped it would start to feel like it. That afternoon, we packed up Tom's car for the drive to his family's cabin. His mom, Linda, had invited me months ago, almost as an afterthought. If you're free for Thanksgiving, we'd love to have you join us, she had said over the phone. At the time, I brushed it off, assuming I'd spend the holiday with my own family. It felt strange now, like the universe had known all along where I needed to be. As we drove through the winding back roads toward the cabin, the tension in my chest began to ease. The late November landscape opened up around us, the bare trees reaching for the pale sky like skeletal fingers. I stared out the window, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket. Are you okay? Tom asked after a while. I will be, I said softly. I didn't know if it was true, but I wanted it to be. When we arrived at the cabin, Tom's family welcomed us with open arms. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, his mom stepped out onto the porch with a bright smile and a wave. Linda had a way of making you feel instantly at ease, like stepping into a warm fire on a freezing night. Sarah, she called, coming down the steps to hug me. I'm so glad you're here. I smiled, hugging her back. Thank you for having me. Of course. We're thrilled to have you. Tom, grab her bags and get inside before you both freeze. The cabin was cozy, the smell of roasting turkey and freshly baked pies filling the air like a comforting memory. Tom's dad, Paul, was in the kitchen basting the turkey, while his younger cousins ran circles around the living room. I couldn't remember the last time I'd walked into a family gathering and felt welcome, like I actually belonged. Linda handed me a glass of wine and smiled warmly. Your family here, Sarah. Relax and enjoy yourself. It was such a simple statement, but it nearly brought tears to my eyes. The next day, Thanksgiving morning, Tom and I woke up early to help with preparations. Linda put us in charge of setting the table while she and Paul tackled the cooking. The house buzzed with energy, laughter, music, the clatter of dishes. It was chaos in the best way, like a scene from a movie I'd always dreamed of being part of. As Tom folded napkins into neat triangles, I caught myself smiling. What? He asked, grinning at me. Nothing, I said, shaking my head. It's just nice being here. He reached over and squeezed my hand. You deserve this, Sarah. After dinner, we headed outside to play cornhole with Tom's cousins. I was terrible. My aim was as accurate as a blindfolded toddler throwing darts, but nobody cared. When I missed the board completely for the third time, Tom doubled over laughing. You're hopeless, he teased, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. I'm trying my best, I said, laughing along with him. His cousin Ellie, who couldn't have been older than 12, piped up from across the yard. You're doing great, Sarah. My mom says it's about having fun, not winning. I smiled. I'll take it. That evening, we sat around the fire pit, wrapped in blankets and sipping hot cocoa. Linda passed around marshmallows for roasting, and I watched the flames dance, feeling more at peace than I had in years. Tom's family treated me like one of their own. Nobody questioned my place or made me feel like an outsider. For once, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself to anyone. Toward the end of the night, as we sat staring at the glowing embers, Linda turned to me with a soft smile. Sarah, I know this is ultimately up to Tom, but I hope you'll join our family for real someday. Linda's words caught me off guard, and my cheeks flushed with warmth. I would be honored, I said softly, and I meant it. That night, as Tom and I lay in bed, I stared up at the ceiling, feeling lighter than I had in months. Thank you for bringing me here, I whispered. Tom rolled onto his side and looked at me, his eyes warm and steady. You're welcome. But you don't have to thank me, Sarah. You belong here. His words hit me like rain after a long drought. I blinked back tears, letting the truth of them sink in. I belonged here. I didn't have to fight for a place at the table or beg for scraps of affection. I was enough just as I was. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I woke up the Saturday after Thanksgiving feeling lighter than I had in years. Tom's family made everything feel so simple, Laughter, food, warmth, and no expectations beyond just showing up and being present. I hadn't realized how starved I was for that kind of love, the kind you don't have to earn. The drive back to Dallas was peaceful. The trees blurred into streaks of gold and brown as we talked about everything and nothing, future hikes we wanted to take, Christmas plans, and how awful I was at cornhole. I laughed more during those few hours than I had in months. But that lightness didn't last long. When we got back to my apartment, I finally picked up my phone. I hadn't checked it all weekend, and part of me regretted turning it back on. The group chat had exploded with dozens of unread messages, photos, and missed calls. I scrolled through the pictures first. There was Adam and Laura, smiling on the ship's deck, the ocean stretching endlessly behind them. Another showed my parents, sunburned and beaming, drinks in hand. Then came the text. Sad that you chose not to be with your family in such beautiful places. I could almost hear my dad's calm, measured tone in those words, layered with just the right amount of judgment to make me feel guilty. He didn't even have to say it outright, he never did. I kept scrolling until I found one from my mom. You should have been there. I hope you realize what you missed out on. What I missed out on. I thought bitterly. What about what they missed out on? What about the fact that they treated me like I didn't matter enough to include in the first place? I sat on the edge of the couch, my face hot as I reread the messages. Tom noticed immediately. He sat down next to me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. What did they say? He asked. I held up the phone so he could see. Same old story, I said quietly. I should feel bad for missing out, not the other way around. Tom sighed. You don't have to justify your choices to them, Sarah. I know, I said, though I didn't really feel like I knew anything. A few minutes later, my mom's name lit up my phone. I hesitated, torn between ignoring it and answering. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Where were you? She said immediately, her voice sharp. Not quite angry, but not soft either. I told you, I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. I spent the holiday with Tom's family. You could have told us sooner, Sarah, she snapped. Do you know how cruel it was to let us believe you were coming and then just not show up? I closed my eyes, swallowing my frustration. Mom, you told me to buy my own ticket. You didn't make me feel like I was part of the plan. Her tone turned defensive. We told you, because you can afford it. It's not like you're struggling, Sarah. Adam and Laura needed the help. And I didn't. I asked, my voice shaking even though I hated how weak it made me sound. I've spent my whole life having to earn everything, while you've handed Adam everything on a silver platter. And I'm the one who gets called ungrateful. That's not fair, Sarah, she said sharply. Adam needs help right now. You've always been independent. You don't understand how hard it is for him. Her words felt like a slap. That old, familiar frustration clawed its way up my throat, but I swallowed it down. I'm independent because you never gave me a choice, I said quietly. There was a long silence on her end. Finally, she said, I'm not going to apologize for raising a strong daughter. You should be grateful for everything we've done for you. Grateful. That word grated against my skin like sandpaper. I had spent my entire life being grateful for scraps of love, for expectations I could never meet, for family vacations I wasn't invited to unless I paid my own way. I guess I'll just leave you alone, I said, my voice trembling. Since I'll never be enough for this family, anyway. I hung up before she could respond. The tears came fast, spilling over as I buried my face in my hands. My whole body shook, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a boulder. Tom was there instantly, pulling me into his arms. It's okay, he whispered. You're okay. But I didn't feel okay. No matter how many times Tom told me I was enough, there was a hole in my chest that only my parents could fill, and I knew they never would. That evening, we curled up on the couch with a pint of ice cream, watching old movies to distract ourselves. Tom made me laugh, quoting the cheesy dialogue, but the tears kept threatening to return. By the time I went to bed, I felt drained. The next morning, I woke up early for work. My phone was silent, no texts, no missed calls. My parents had gone quiet, which was somehow worse than their anger. I had a feeling they were waiting for me to apologize, to admit I had overreacted, just like I always had. But this time, I wasn't going to. At work, I threw myself into my tasks, editing technical manuals and answering emails like nothing was wrong. When my coworkers asked about my Thanksgiving, I gave the same polite answer every time. It was nice. I spent it with Tom's family. I didn't tell them about the fight with my parents. I didn't tell them about the photos or the texts or the phone call that ended with me crying on the couch. Because deep down, I was ashamed. Ashamed of how badly I still craved their approval, even after everything they had put me through. That night, Tom and I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights blink in the distance. I don't know why it's so hard, I said finally. Because they're your parents, Tom replied. You want them to love you the way you deserve. That's not a bad thing, Sarah. But what if they never will? I whispered. Tom was quiet for a moment before he said, Then maybe you have to stop asking for it. His words hit me like a punch to the gut because I knew he was right. I had spent my entire life begging for something my parents weren't capable of giving me. Maybe it was time to stop. But I wasn't ready.
Not yet.
The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mom. We need to talk before Christmas. Let us know when you're free. I stared at the message for a long time before setting my phone back down. Christmas. I knew what that meant. They didn't want to explain my absence to the rest of the family. They wanted me to play nice, smile for pictures, and pretend nothing had happened. But I wasn't sure if I could do that anymore. The heaviness of my mom's text lingered for days, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. We need to talk before Christmas. I ignored it first, hoping they'd let it go. But I knew my parents better than that. They weren't the kind of people who could live with unresolved tension, especially if it risked them looking bad in front of the rest of the family. By mid-December, my lack of response had triggered another round of messages. This time, my dad chimed in. We can't just leave things like this, Sarah. Family means something. Let us know when we can talk. Family means something. I sat with those words, turning them over in my mind like a jagged piece of glass. What did family mean to them? Did it mean unconditional love, the kind I felt from Tom and his parents? Or did it mean blind loyalty, the expectation that I would keep my mouth shut and play the role they had chosen for me? Tom noticed my mood. He was gentle about it, never pushing me to talk when I wasn't ready. One night, we were on the couch, his arm draped over my shoulders as we half-watched a crime drama neither of us was really paying attention to. They still messaging you? He asked softly. Yeah, I said with a sigh. They want to talk before Christmas. Are you going to? I hesitated. I don't know. I mean, what's the point? I'll say my piece, they'll deny everything, and then they'll call me ungrateful again. I'm just tired of it. Tom kissed the top of my head. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, Sarah. That's the problem, I said quietly. I don't know what I want. A few days later, my phone rang during my lunch break at work. It was my mom. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Avoiding her forever wasn't realistic, so I finally picked up. Hi, Mom, I said cautiously. Sarah. Her voice was soft, too soft, the way it always was when she wanted to lull me into a false sense of security. How are you? I'm fine, I said flatly. What's going on? We need to fix this, she said, her tone taking on a rehearsed earnestness. It's not right for us to go into Christmas with all this tension. Your father and I want the whole family together, including you. I bit the inside of my cheek. So, it's about Christmas. You don't want to explain to everyone why I'm not there, right? She sighed, and I could picture her shaking her head, the way she always did when she thought I was being unreasonable. Sarah, that's not fair. We want you there, because you're part of the family. I didn't respond. I wanted to ask why being part of the family only seemed to matter when it was convenient for them. I wanted to scream about all the hurt I'd carried for years. But I knew it wouldn't matter. It never did. Mom continued, her voice tinged with frustration. Can't you just let this go? It's Christmas. I don't understand why you always have to hold on to things like this. Because it's not fair, Mom, I said, my voice trembling as the words tumbled out. You and Dad act like Adam deserves the world, and I deserve nothing. You've never treated us the same, and I'm sick of it. She let out a sharp breath. We have always treated you fairly, Sarah. No, you haven't. I snapped, the dam breaking. You've paid for everything for Adam, his rent, his flights, his mistakes. When I moved back home, you hit me with $10,000 in rent. You don't see how that's different. Your brother needs help, she said firmly. You don't. You're strong, Sarah. You always have been. My throat tightened, and I fought to keep my voice steady. I'm strong because I had no other choice. You never gave me the option to depend on you the way Adam does. Sarah, she said, her tone softening, I'm sorry you feel that way, but we can't go back and change the past. We just want you with us for the holidays. Her words felt hollow, like they'd been pulled from a script. She wasn't apologizing for what she'd done. She was apologizing for how I felt, as if my pain was a problem of perception rather than her actions. I don't know if I'm coming, I said finally. Sarah, she started, but I ended the call before she could finish. That night, Tom found me in the kitchen, sitting at the table with my head in my hands. I had been replaying the conversation in my mind, picking apart every word, every silence. What happened? Tom asked gently, pulling out a chair to sit across from me. They want me to come for Christmas, I said, my voice heavy. She didn't apologize, though. Not really. It's like they don't even understand what they've done. Tom sighed, reaching for my hand. Do you want to go? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to. It's Christmas. I don't want to lose my whole family. But it hurts to keep pretending nothing's wrong, he finished for me. Yeah, I whispered. Tom squeezed my hand. Then don't go, Sarah. You don't have to keep putting yourself in situations that hurt you. But if I don't go, they'll tell everyone I'm being selfish, I said, my voice breaking. They'll make it sound like I'm the problem. My mom knows how to twist things, so it looks like I'm the bad guy. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, It doesn't matter what they tell other people. You know the truth. As Christmas approached, the pressure mounted. My mom called twice more, leaving voicemails that all sounded the same. She wanted to smooth things over. She wanted the family to be together. She wanted me to stop holding on to the past. I didn't call her back. The day before Christmas Eve, my dad finally sent a text. This has gone on long enough, Sarah. You're coming to Christmas. We'll talk it out like adults, and then move forward. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. On Christmas Day, Tom and I packed up the car and drove to his parents' cabin. Linda greeted us at the door with a warm hug and a plate of cookies, as if she'd been waiting for us all morning. I'm so glad you're here, she said, squeezing my arm. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. The truth was I felt guilty for not being with my own family. Even though I knew my parents would spend Christmas pretending everything was perfect, I couldn't help imagining them at the dinner table. Adam would be laughing at one of his own jokes, while my mom passed around the mashed potatoes. I wondered what they'd say about me. Would they tell everyone I was too busy to come? Or would they shrug it off and label me difficult again? Tom must have noticed my faraway expression because he leaned over and whispered, Hey, you don't have to feel bad about choosing yourself. I know, I said quietly, though the guilt lingered at the edges of my mind. That afternoon, as we sat by the fire opening presents with his family, Linda handed me a handmade scarf, the softest thing I'd ever felt. Tom's dad passed me a mug that read, You're part of the family, whether you like it or not. Everyone laughed, but I nearly cried. For the first time, I understood what Christmas could feel like. Warm, easy, free of tension. There were no eggshells to tiptoe around, no scorecards, no suffocating expectations. It was love, simple, unconditional love. I glanced at Tom and smiled. Maybe this was what family was supposed to feel like. Christmas passed quietly, and for once, I didn't feel like I was navigating a minefield. Tom's family made the holiday effortless. No sharp words, no strained smiles, no passive-aggressive remarks. When I woke up the next morning, I felt peaceful, as if I had finally exhaled after years of holding my breath.
But that peace didn't last.
When I turned my phone back on after 2 days, I found exactly what I had expected. Missed calls, voicemails, and texts. My family had spent the holiday together, and my absence hadn't gone unnoticed. My mom had sent a message late on Christmas evening. "We missed you today, Sarah. Your absence really hurt your father." That was it. No details. No effort to understand why I'd stayed away. Certainly no apology for how they had made me feel so small. Instead, the blame shifted back to me. I was the problem. I had hurt them. It was as if my parents lived in an alternate reality where my feelings didn't exist, unless, of course, they inconvenienced someone else. I ignored the message and tried to go back to my life, but the guilt lingered like smoke in the back of my mind. I had made the right choice, I knew that deep down, but it still felt wrong. A few days later, my phone rang while Tom and I were watching a movie. Adam's name flashed on the screen, and I froze. He rarely called me. Most of the time, he stayed out of any conflict with our parents, preferring to keep his hands clean. "Should I answer it?" I asked Tom quietly. "It's up to you," he said, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. After a moment, I swiped the screen. "Hello." "Sarah," Adam said, his tone calm but clipped. "What the hell happened?" I sighed. "What do you mean?" "I mean Christmas," he said, irritation creeping into his voice. "Mom and Dad were a wreck. They said you just ignored them and ruined the holiday." My jaw tightened. "I didn't ruin anything, Adam. I chose not to come because I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter." Adam let out a heavy breath, the kind he always used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "Why do you have to make everything a big deal, Sarah? They're trying their best." "No, they're not," I shot back. "Adam, they treat you like you can do no wrong. They pay for everything you need, they've never asked you to stand on your own, and meanwhile, I get slapped with $10,000 in rent the second I get a new job. Do you really not see how unfair that is?" "You're just jealous," Adam said, his voice flat. Those words hit like an old scar being reopened. "I'm not jealous, Adam. I'm exhausted," I said, my voice shaking now. "You get to make mistakes and get help. I don't. I have to be perfect just to earn the bare minimum, and I'm tired of it." "Maybe if you stopped acting like a victim, they'd treat you differently," he said coldly. It felt like he'd slapped me. For a moment, I couldn't respond. Every ounce of hope I'd held onto, that Adam might one day understand, that he might see things for what they really were, shattered in that single sentence. "Goodbye, Adam," I said softly, hanging up before he could say anything else. I set the phone down on the table and buried my face in my hands. I didn't want to cry, but the tears came anyway. Tom was there instantly, pulling me into his arms without a word. He let me cry until the sobs faded into silence. "He doesn't get it," I whispered. "He never will." "I know," Tom said quietly. "But that's not your fault, Sarah." In the days that followed, I replayed Adam's words in my head, hoping each time that they might hurt a little less. But they didn't. I thought about how close we had been as kids. Back then, Adam was my hero, the one who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up late playing video games with me, who stood up for me when I got teased at school. I used to think Adam understood me better than anyone else. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. My parents' favoritism had driven a wedge between us, and Adam had been all too happy to accept their privileges without question. I wanted to believe he still cared about me deep down, but the truth was, he had chosen their side. Maybe he didn't see it that way. Maybe he thought he was just keeping the peace. But to me, it felt like a betrayal. One evening, Tom and I sat on the balcony, wrapped in blankets, as we watched the city lights. The air was crisp and refreshing, like a reset button after a long day. "I've been thinking," I said quietly. Tom looked over at me. "About what?" "About cutting contact with them," I said, the words heavy on my tongue. "Not completely, not yet. But maybe I need to put some real distance between us. I need a break from all of this." Tom nodded. "You don't have to explain it to me, Sarah. I think it's the right move." I feel guilty," I admitted. "They're still my family. If I walk away, they'll tell everyone I'm the problem." I don't want to lose the rest of my family, too. Tom reached for my hand. Sarah, you can't control what they say about you. You can't change how they see things. But you don't deserve to keep putting yourself through this just to make them happy. I swallowed hard, staring out at the skyline. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do it. You are, Tom said firmly. You've been strong your whole life, Sarah. But this time, you're being strong for yourself. That's different. His words sank in like a lifeline, and for the first time, I thought maybe he was right. That night, I sat down and wrote a message to my parents. Mom, Dad, I need some space for a while. I love you both, but I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it isn't. I'm tired of feeling like I don't matter. I'm tired of being compared to Adam. I need time to figure out what kind of relationship I want with you, and until then, I need to step back. I hope you can understand. I stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. When I finally did, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as if I'd let go of something I'd been holding onto for far too long. Tom sat beside me, his hand on my knee. How do you feel? Scared, I admitted, but also a lighter. That's a good start, he said with a smile. And for the first time in years, I believed him.